Artists Boyle Family have spent the last 30 years travelling the world making three-dimensional paintings of the Earth's surface from randomly selected sites. Although best known for these incredibly detailed and textured pictures, they've explored a wide range of media, and their early work was central to the cultural explosion of the 60s. What sets them apart from everyone else in the art world is that they work together as a family. Father, mother, daughter, son.
The response of people to our pictures is always their business. It's nothing really to do with us. We've had people laugh at our pictures. We've had people do the most amazing double takes in front of our pictures. We've had people crying in front of our pictures. But that's their business. It's no part of our objective. Our primary objective is to teach ourselves to see.
Mark Boyle, son of a Glasgow lawyer, and Joan Hills, an architectural student from Edinburgh, met in the late 50s. They moved to London, and with no formal art education, began working as artists, scouring the demolition sites of London in search of material for their work.
The reason we worked on those demolition sites was that they were available. The material was free. You could take what you wanted. You could do what you wanted. And they kept changing. That was the great thing. It just changed all the time. We were making these large collages out of just rejected material. And Joan would be working on one at one end of the room, and I would be working on another at the other end of the room. And one day we'd been much looked at what the other's picture, and then we said, we should really just work together.
We kept very quiet about any collaboration that we made because we really didn't see how any collector would ever buy anything made by two people. It always had to be one male-obsessed artist, so I could just keep quiet in the background.
I think the very first work were collages, as I remember. They were, instead of being cast to look like pieces of wood, they were actually made from the material, the very earliest work. So they were enormous collages, and that's something I've always been interested in. So they were the first things I would have seen. But they looked like the work now, but they were made from the original objects rather than being recreated.
One day we did find a smashed television set, and beside it was lying the grey rectangle that is the kind of anchor piece for the glass, between the glass and the cabinet. And inside, everything inside that grey rectangle looked absolutely remarkable and beautiful. And we realized that this was a way of isolating this enormous site and really focusing on something without touching it. The next time we came back, we brought some 2x1 and we made ourselves a frame, and we threw that about. And when it didn't disintegrate, we went and had a look inside it. And every time we simply randomly threw it without looking at where it would land, it had a great picture inside it. And we just decided it was a great way of looking at how it really was.
And what we concluded was that we were going to work for the rest of our lives on a kind of art which would include anything, that could include anything. Actually, at the time we said that would include everything, but eventually that was moderated to the idea of it could include anything. that nothing would be excluded from what we wanted to do. And the idea wasn't so much to make something completely random, it was to avoid making personal choices so that we weren't choosing places because they appealed to us.
While developing the Earth pieces, Mark and Joan were also involved in putting on innovative events and performances. These were designed to challenge and subvert routine perceptions of the world.
We sent out a printed invitation to friends which said at the top, the annual dig of the Institute of Contemporary Archaeology. Please meet on the steps of the ICA, Dover Street, at 12 noon on whatever it was a Sunday. And in a side street behind blocks of flats that are already looking over Shepherd's Bush, they brought these people in, and it was a rubble-strewn area where something had been demolished. And we cordoned off an area, and we told these people they were indeed to dig, and they really couldn't believe it, because we had people like the director of the ICA and Gustav Metzger, the artist, and a lot of people that we knew, but they did go ahead and start to dig, and they were moving these bits of rubble and concrete, and then out came a bashed up head, or the foot of a broken statue, or tins, and everything that appeared was clearly a valuable find, and indeed the whole place was a demolished garden statue factory. And even the smallest bits of paper or writing on an old pad that had been in the office and Gustav Metzger would examine and say, documentation, we have to have that, And things were collected. As they dug them out, they were put at the side of this place, and they were collected, and by the end of the day, we had a lot of items. And we took them round to our flat in Shepherd's Bush. And a few weeks later, we had an exhibition, and we asked the people back, and they had dug it out, and they came, and we put broken heads and bits of statues on plinths, and they went around peering at them and looking at them.
We had this light show. It started with a piece of ours which was about physical and chemical change, and we had found a way to project physical and chemical reactions onto a screen using a very tiny glass container the same size as a slide. And we would introduce something like a piece of zinc in there, perforated zinc, and then we'd pour in acid that would destroy it. And you'd watch this thing, and it wasn't just kind of a neat, tidy, eating away, nibbling at the sides. It was frenzy, total goddamn frenzy. And you would see bits of this zinc fly off in all directions and so on and so on. And we put the show called Earth, Air, Fire and Water on with a lot of things like that. In 1966, we made a piece called Soni Lumiere for Bodily Fluids and Functions. And we projected all the different fluids that we could reach, urine, sweat, vomit, blood, tears, catarrh, semen. It was a new way of making a portrait. Instead of concentrating on the appearance of the face, it was looking at other aspects of the body that hadn't been done.
These experiments with glass slides, chemicals and projectors led Mark and Joan to invent the first liquid light show, which they performed at art galleries and underground venues. It soon became synonymous with the counterculture of the time.
It was 1966. We'd been doing this around the kind of art circuit for some time, and here we would doing it in this club, and we thought that was kind of good and populist and, you know, what we should be doing. This was our first real meeting with the alternative society. And the first band up on the stand was a band called Soft Machine. And when we heard their music, we thought, this is really the greatest thing you could imagine. This is wonderful. I've got a drum kit and some sticks. So when I'm drunk,
we had a lot more courage with Mark's light shows. It would kind of melt the audience. It seemed to get rid of the sort of conventional expectations of what a group would do.
The collaboration with Soft Machine continued, and most of 1968 was spent touring the United States with them and Jimi Hendrix.
When we're doing this show in San Francisco with Soft Machine, all the guys who were doing the local light shows all came to us and said, "How do you do that? What are you doing, man?" You know? And I was being frightfully secretive about it, and I wouldn't tell anyone. I knew that if we did it there, if we told them there, it would be on the soap ads in Los Angeles by the time we got there. But I was feeling bad, I thought, and people kept saying, "You can't own an idea, Mr. Boyle, you know? You can't own an idea." And I thought, they're right, and I am wrong. You can't own an idea. And then Hendrix said, I don't know whether it's true or not to this day, but Jimi Hendrix said, you know, when Louis Armstrong was playing in New Orleans in the early days of jazz, he said he used to play with a cloth over his hands so the other trumpeters couldn't see what he was doing. And I felt so good. I felt it's me and Louis. Paranoid.
Mark and Joan's work on the earth pieces continued to evolve. New materials, plastics, resins and fiberglass allowed them to recreate the Earth's surface with incredible accuracy. This led to their most ambitious project, the World Series.
Is that where it is?
Yep.
This is the original one. The World Series began in 1967, and over the next couple of years we had 1,000 people blindfolded, and they fired darts at a huge map of the world. And the idea was that eventually we would get to all of those places, or as many of them as we could manage, and make one of our pictures. We wanted to actually see how the world really is at a particular spot, at a particular time, when there's no personal selection by us. In Norway, as far as Britain was concerned, there were 3 darts. One of them was in Norfolk, another was just off an island called Bute, and the third one, the dart had actually more or less obliterated the island of Barra.
In January 2000, the Boyles travelled to the Hebridean island of Barra to continue work on the World Series site, where they have already made a number of preparatory studies. Of the 1,000 darts, 2/3 landed in the sea, and a number of the other sites have proved inaccessible for political reasons. The scale of the World Series is such that it is impossible to complete in a single lifetime.
Well, I wouldn't mind actually looking a bit over there, because that was where we did the bits with the worm cast. You remember we made the piece with the worm cast? It was just over there.
You get a dart hole, and that's quite big. We get a map of that area, and a further random selection is made until we're selected down to an area that's, say, a beach or a road, and we can draw our own map of that area, and then we make a further random selection just of that area. And then we throw up a carpenter's right angle spinning into the air, and wherever that lands, that gives us the first corner of the picture.
This is very like the thing we had at Canberra, isn't it? It was a long, sort of slow tide.
Sometimes we can't make it. It's maybe on private property and people won't give us permission, or it is something that we just technically can't do at the moment. We don't make another random selection because that is the choice. That is the random selection has been made, that is the site, and if we can't do it for any reason, we don't just go 100 yards up the road and make another one. We then just have to go back home.
Mark and Joan had 2 children, Sebastian, who was born in 1962, and Georgia, who was born 2 years later. Mark and Joan involved the children in the work from the earliest age.
Because my parents' studio was always in the house that we lived in, they were always working there. So when we came home from school when we were young, we'd always just wander into the studio and see what they were doing. And it would start off with us picking up tools, finding a hammer or a chisel or something like that. And then it just developed.
Really, from the very earliest days, George and I were aware of Mark and Joan working on pictures, and we thought that was completely normal.
We had this house which was it was kind of like a mixture between a studio and a laboratory in some ways. So you'd walk in and there would be, test tubes and cameras and projectors and swabs and things like that, and Petri dishes. All of that going on, and then there'd also be another whole area which was to do with actually making the pictures.
Georgia said that she went to St James's Norway school, and when the first child asked her home at tea time, she was astonished to discover that they didn't have heaps of rubble in the corner and sacks of sand, that they actually had, I don't know what, not cocktail cabinets, but probably other bits of furniture.
I used to think this is kind of odd because they have sofas and tables and furniture and all of that, curtains, but they don't have these things that we had that were hanging on the wall.
The first project the family completed together was at Camber Sands in the south of England, when in 1969 they embarked on their Tidal series.
I remember building that wall, do you remember that?
No, what was that?
And we had to build this, the tide was coming in, and we were desperately trying to finish on the beach, and there was you and I with our kind of, buckets and spades, plastic buckets and spades, desperately building a kind of wall to prevent the tide going
Holding
over.
back the North Sea.
Yeah, exactly.
To stop it
And
from
got
ruining the
more,
picture.
yeah, and then of course it got more and more.
We were trying desperately to finish the picture before the tide arrived. We took one square of that beach and we made a study of the surface of it after each tide for a week. So that there were 14 studies, 2 tides a day, and you saw how that beach, that square of beach, changed with each tide. From the earliest age, Sebastian and Georgia worked to the maximum of their potential with us. Working so hard that I thought, my God, I'll put them off the concept of work for the whole of their lives, they'll hate art forever.
one summer, my father said, right, we're all going to Norway, you know. And we just left and drove off. My father had just passed his driving test, you know, the day before in order to kind of do this trip. So the whole thing depended on him passing the driving test, which he did. And yeah, we just kind of set off and, you know, drove up through the Arctic Circle in this 1954 Bedford ambulance.
We had no idea what travel actually meant, and we just travelled for days, and it was freezing cold. And where the road wasn't covered in snow, it was like a ploughed field. And we began to realise what an enormous task we'd undertaken with the World Series.
We just did an amazing amount of work, but we didn't really think of it in those kind of terms, you know. I think people think it must have been really easy for us. I don't think people really were aware of the amount of work that we did and how hard it was.
The thaw arrived while we were there, and so we did a series of studies of melting snow, you know, and the Earth just gradually coming through. The first time we showed snow pieces in Oslo, all the workers of the museum gathered round to watch these pictures these Norwegian pictures being unveiled. And eventually we took the covers off and stood back, and there was a long silence. My heart was really just going like crazy. And eventually someone said something in Norwegian, and I grabbed the arm of the director of the museum, our friend, and said, "What did he say?" And he said, "He wants to know how you keep them cold." Of course, there are all kinds of other aspects of this world apart from the surface of the Earth. And so we made pieces that were related to physical and chemical change, to plants, animals, human beings. We decided to make some random selections on the surface of my body. And what I wanted to do was to remove a piece of the skin and to use that like a negative in the projector. And so we got one of these things, which is a thing that you use for an operation called trepanning, where they actually make a hole in your skull. And I thought, well, I'm not trying to do anything really adventurous like that. I'm just trying to make a hole in the skin of my big toe. And another one in the skin of my chest. It was just these two to start off with. And I took this thing, and what it is, it's a kind of circular razor blade. And I took it down, and I went down, and I started to do this. And I found I could do it. But it was hellish sore. I mean, really, really painful. And when I tried to remove the skin, I mean, I did remove it, but it was so painful, I couldn't bear it. And I got it off my chest as well. And we looked at them, and they were completely useless because you couldn't get light through them. So then we found a method of removing the top layer of the epidermis. That's the top layer of the skin alone. And at that point, we made 10 random selections on the surface of my body, and we went round them. And then we put that, like a negative, into the enlarger.
Investigations such as these led the Boyles to develop techniques akin to those used in science.
The density photographs were part of the Multi-Human Being series, which started in about 1970. The photographs indicated by colour differentiation the flow of people in certain social situations, and the darker the colour, the denser the flow of people.
Shepherd's Bush series was one of the first, which was random selections from an ordnance map of the area around which we lived. And some of those landed on the Lorry Park site, and we went to look at those, and we would make them. And then another series we decided was possible, I thought, to make a series of random gardens. The idea I had was to gather up the top inch or so of the soil with any seeds that were embedded in it and transfer them onto boxes that were also a metre square, but with enough soil in them to grow whatever I had collected off this topsoil. And at one point we had a dozen of these boxes, and they went up to Scotland growing vigorously and were exhibited in the Kelvin Hall exhibition.
The notion of a collaborative research project, which you might call Boyle Family, stripping away ideology and stripping away a number of these sort of cultural baggage that we all have, to pursue a line of inquiry. I mean, that's partly what their work is all about. I think that notion really says, how objective can you possibly be?
My brother invented this phrase, motiveless appraisal. He said to me one day, I can't understand why you're so hung up with this idea of objectivity. Objectivity is motiveless appraisal. Nobody can achieve that. And I was listening to him, and I thought, he's right. Motiveless appraisal. That is what objectivity is, and that is what we are trying to achieve. And it's the quality of being able to look at something without any motive, you know, without sort of even saying, that'll make an effective picture.
We're not interested in illusions. That's not what this work's about. We're not sort of saying, look at us, aren't we clever? We can make this out of fiberglass. We're saying, look at this. This is the reality that surrounds us. Look at it and see it for what it is.
The question mark for me is always at the very end of that. I think it kind of becomes something else. It isn't just an objective research project, of course, but it's only because it's pursued with that rigour that it has this amazing sort of poetic flourishing at the very end, which is when the works are extracted from these amazing sites all around the world and put on white walls, beautifully lit. You know, then it changes into something really quite magical.
The interesting thing about the Boyle family's work is you're invited to scrutinise. I like that a lot, you know. A lot of things you're invited to kind of glance at and then kind of, you know, take a puff and a fag and walk away. This thing invites you to sort of, you know, go right in there. It sucks people in, and that's a fantastic thing. You know, art that has no kind of, they don't make concessions, you know. They stick to their guns, they don't change it, they don't lop a bit off to fix through the door, or, you know, they just do what they do, and it brings people in, you know.
Barra is the last World Series site in Britain. The World Series has taken Boyle Family around the globe to many diverse locations, from a coal mine in the Ruhr Valley to the Australian outback, from a ploughed field in Sardinia to the Negev Desert in the southern island of Japan. Each site presents its own logistical and climactic challenges.
We spent quite a long time trying to get onto the island, but because of the bad weather, the day we travelled, the plane landed, but we landed in the midst of a power cut. And then we've had some great weather, and then today it's been really awful.
Persistent bad weather makes it impossible for the Boyles to work. They retreat to the Land Rover, waiting for the weather to improve.
We've been talking about how we make pictures, and it takes a great deal of hard work to put it together. And we get a great buzz out of producing that thing. But inevitably, we're also 4 individuals, and we can be extremely lonely in that context as well. Moments of coming together, but also moments of great loneliness.
This is a very active and passionate collaboration where everybody speaks their mind completely freely, and we do argue about things. And
we don't really have a kind of family life that revolves around anything but the pictures. Yeah. That's it. That's the thing you have to accept at the end of the day.
I think it's absolutely critical to an understanding of this family. That is the problem, that for some reason or other we've been so dedicated to bloody well sorting out the pictures that we haven't really had time to, taken the time, haven't insisted on making the time to get on with the other aspects of life. So in one sense we've been living a kind of fraud as well, but as you say, as you said, that is the price you have to pay.
Because you're always questioning whether, whether what you do is any good, and wondering how good it is and whether you can make it better, and what does it all mean? But equally, you don't want to share those questions with everybody else, because you're trying to figure them out for yourself, and you don't really want other people telling you the answers or using your own words as evidence against you. We're lucky that there's the 4 of us and we can have the discussions amongst ourselves, but a lot of artists don't have that.
Well, I think that thing about your own individuality is quite a difficult one, in the sense that I don't, that's what supposedly everyone's striving for, but I don't think that, I don't think anyone ever knows if they've arrived there or not.
In 1978, Mark and Joan were chosen to represent Britain at the Venice Biennale.
Joan had selected 5 hairs from me, and we'd pulled them out by the root, and then we'd had electron microphotographs taken of them. We got them blown up to the size of trees, People would walk in and you'd see them walk over with a kind of bored expression, go over and read the label at the side, and then suddenly you'd see them jolt back and call their wife and kids and start to explain it to them.
I became aware of the Boyle family's work, I think, through Francis Bacon. I collected Francis Bacon quite a long time ago, and when I once told him, look, I would love to continue to collect, but it's just too expensive, I can't afford it. Who else is good? And he never liked to really that question, because he never thought too much about colleagues. And he said, well, I guess a rather good sculptor is Giacometti. I said, well, this is out of my league too. So he said, well, the Boyle family. We get people of all kind of tastes sometimes who have no idea about contemporary art or hate contemporary art. But then they get very quickly intrigued, and usually the second thing men ask, how does this thing hold on the wall? Because they think it weighs a ton, and they think they're real concrete slabs here. So when I say, well, don't worry, we have a very strong wall, he says, well, but what is it made from? So I usually ask them, well, what do you think? And they say, well, there seems to be concrete slabs, and and this drum, this oil drum, and earth, a lot of earth that may weigh a ton. I said, well, in fact, it doesn't. No, it's made out of fiberglass. And then the next question is, how did it do it? And I say, I don't know. They won't tell me. You just have to enjoy it as it is.
So when we're looking at the picture, we can't say for sure this bit is painted or this bit is real. And that sounds completely and totally mad. Georgia put it really well once when she said we leave some real material in because it sets the standard for the painting. And that's actually really true. It's not a deliberate thing that we do. But if you could tell this bit was real and that bit is painted fiberglass, if those jumped out at you, then the picture would fail.
The World Series, I think, will certainly carry on it. I think it's something, because we were there at its kind of at the beginning of it. I think it's something that Sebastian and I feel very much part of, and it's ours to continue.
The fact is that I feel all the time that we've only just begun. We've only just begun on the World Series. We've been to a lot of places. We've done a lot of work. There are museums all around the world with these pieces that we've made in them. But it's as though we've just finished our apprenticeship. We actually know how to do it now. And okay, lots of new things are going to come along that we're going to not know how to do, but we're going to work that out. But we've basically finished our apprenticeship, and we've begun, and this is the real thing starting now.